we'll probably have a lot of videos on Zionism because it's pretty significant, and they're basically in less than 15-minute clips. But I wanted to point this out. I added this slide just to show you these numbers. So I showed you in the end of the last video. Well, I'll just go back and show you. So here's Jewish immigration, right? The waves of immigration. So the top part are waves during those periods. And then these are rounded off numbers. Okay, just so you get that. It's easier to use rounded off numbers. They're pretty close, I think, or as close as whatever statistics are available. So it shows you kind of the basic waves. So I talked about these at the end of the last video. Here you have, and the bottom ones again, so 1922 is the total Jewish population in 1922 in Palestine. 36, see how much it's changed in, 14 years there. So I added this slide just to show you what happened. So total population of Palestine, okay? I did leave off some others here. There's about 2% others in each of these, and I just didn't think it was worth looking at this point. So those numbers you see make up 98% of the population of Palestine in each year time period, okay? So there was 2% others, so don't worry about the others. But look at these numbers. So 1931, 865,000 Arabs in Palestine, 174,000 Jews. And you can go back and see how quickly the Jewish number adds up, right? Still a lot of Arabs, though, right? And some of that's through birth and other Arabs moving in there, some migration of Arabs, too. Excuse me. In 1941, you see the number again, right? I don't need to read them all to you. You can see them there. So, but the thing you need to see there is the Jewish growth of the Jewish population growth is growing a lot faster percentage-wise, although it was still lower. And almost all that's immigration. And we know what's going on, of course, and you have World War II there and the Holocaust and all that. So I want you to see the connection between those things. Most of you are taking classes where you talk about World War II or the Holocaust, right? So there's a worldwide connection there, and I mentioned some of that last time. So let's get going here. I think I started on this but stopped. So I'll just start again here. The Jewish National Fund was the fund created by Zionists to essentially help pay for the settlement of Palestine by Jews, okay? And this was they had a pretty large amount of money to spend on this, and it was always getting more and more support. So they raised money for this in the West, okay? Well, among Zionist supporters. So not only did it purchase land, as I mentioned here, these big land purchases it did, and one of the early big land purchases was this, and I think I may have said that wrong, it's the Jezreel Valley, right? If you know anything about the Bible, that's the same, the Jezreel Valley. In 1920, they purchased this 50,000 acres in the Jezreel Valley. That'll be the first major large settlements of Jewish farms, okay? So a lot of the kibbutzim will be going into these places during this time period. The other thing the Jewish National Fund will do over time is also fund capital improvements. So they will provide financing and equipment and all the other things for the farms and other Jewish settlements in Palestine and help pay for people to go and settle there, all right? But they're only doing it for Jews to go settle there, right? That's one of the things you need to see. So this was the first. This was also the largest purchase over time, but there'll be more and more in the 20s and 30s. Now, who they're buying it from, right? And this is kind of a basic thing that happens. The Jews buy up land over time, and this wasn't all of what was Palestine, but certain parts of it. They buy up land over time, and they evict Arab tenants off this land and replace them with Jewish tenants, okay? Now, this is a little bit complicated because a lot of these Arab tenants, families have been on this land for a long time. And a lot of the landowners were, in a sense, absentee landowners. They didn't live there. So when these organizations came to them and said, hey, we'll pay you all this money for this land, they were like, okay, we'll sell it to you, right? So for them, it was a good business deal. Now, percentage-wise, though, even by 1939, percentage-wise, only about 10% of the total cultivatable land in Palestine was Jewish. So only still about 10% of the land by the late 30s, okay, was Jewish owned. But it did have a big negative effect on many Arab peasants, okay? So that's one of the things you have to see. A lot of this land that was transferred was some of the best cultivatable land, and it had a negative effect on the Arab peasants in Palestine. And the Arab peasants made up about 2/3 of the Arab population. So we're talking about, if it's 1 million something, right? 66% of that population were Arab peasants, okay? And so this caused problems because these people lost, in their minds, what was their homes and their land, even though technically they had been tenants, right? So that was a big problem. And this led to, as I show you there, communal conflicts. British tax policy also played a role in this. British tax policy, because remember, the British still control this place. It's a British mandate, and they stay in control of it technically until 1948. So the British tax policy required direct cash payments. Okay, and this was in place of what had existed in the Ottoman system in the past. That hurt the Arab peasants. And that added to the problem. That was another issue. Okay, all right. In 1929, you had a significant event called the Wailing Wall disturbances. This was a dispute over access to the remains of the temple in Jerusalem, known as the Wailing Wall. You might have seen this before. Jews would go there to pray outside the wall, and they still do. And they would go there to pray, and they would, this is near, if you look at Jerusalem, I think I'll find a picture if I don't have one on here. On the Wailing Wall is part of the wall, and on top of the surface above the wall is where the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are. Okay? So that's thought to be where the last, I guess that would be Herod's temple, the remains of Herod's temple would be. Okay? So here's you can see a picture, I found one here of the Wailing Wall, and you see the gold dome, that's the Dome of the Rock. Okay? So that is the main holy place for Muslims, right? There's the Dome of the Rock there, and there's also the Al-Aqsa Mosque over there, well, which are very significant in Islam. During the Mandate in 1929, the Muslims controlled this area. It was under the authority of the Mufti of Jerusalem. Remember, we talked about that position. In that area you see there, in that picture, at the time, Jews were allowed to come pray outside the wall. They were not allowed to set stuff up, even like the stuff you see there. At least the Arabs, the Muslim Arab leader said, you can't put benches or chairs. You can go pray there, but you can't put benches or chairs. Nor can you put up screens that would separate male prayers from female prayers. Okay? And so Jews were always pushing the envelope on this, or certain Jews, not all of them. Certain Jewish groups in Jerusalem at the time would go and set things up like that, right? And so the Supreme Muslim Council with the Mufti made a big deal about this, and they complained about it. So this is what the Wailing Wall disturbances are. You had a violent confrontation in August of 1929 when an Arab mob, and there were Jewish demonstrations, an Arab mob, however you want to look at it, maybe the Arabs would say a Jewish mob. I'm just telling you kind of the way it's pictured. But these Jewish demonstrations made these Arabs mad. These Arab groups attacked 2 Jewish quarters in Jerusalem, and they killed Jews in the towns of Hebron and Safat. Okay? The British forces did put down the riots, but there were deaths on both sides, over 100 deaths of Jews and Arabs during this time, these Wailing Wall disturbances. And although the immediate problem was the thing that set all this off was this dispute over the Wailing Wall, it showed a lot more internal problems going on, right? So let me go back, because I want to show you that picture. So that's the Wailing Wall disturbances. In response to this, the British want to figure out, what the problem is. So they set up this commission, and the commission wrote in 1930, they wrote what's known as the Passfield White Paper. Okay, the Passfield White Paper. So this commission was called the Shaw Commission. The Shaw Commission recommended that the British obligations to the Arabs should be more precisely defined, and that Jewish immigration should be brought more directly under British control, because they really had kind of just let it go, or really hadn't done much about it. So the White Paper emphasized these things. The White Paper stressed that the Britain's dual obligation as a mandatory power, dual obligation to both sides, as the mandates said, and the government's intention to set aside state lands for the settlement of landless Arab peasants, because they recognized that was a problem, even in 1930. Okay, that this was a problem that was going to that could get worse, and it did. So the White Paper suggested restricting Jewish immigration at the time. So where did it go from there? Well, this is when Jewish lobbyists, so I just kind of said both of those things, right? I guess I could have put that up for B, but everything I just said, I was just talking about there. In 1931, British Zionists, remember Chaim Weizmann, we should remember him. He was still very connected in Britain, and he was, one of the main guys in the World Zionist Organization. They put some pressure on the British government, so they mounted a lobbying effort to the Prime Minister. So this is the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, Ramsay MacDonald, to reject this White Paper. So they said they didn't want this to happen because their biggest concern is this: they do not want to restrict Jewish immigration, right, to Palestine. And this campaign was successful. In 1931, Ramsay MacDonald read to the House of Commons. So the Prime Minister reads to the House of Commons a personal letter he had written to Chaim Weizmann, in which this White Paper was rejected, in which he personally rejected, and therefore the government, as Prime Minister, rejected this White Paper. So it was a pretty significant event. Now, skipping ahead. Let me say one little thing. That's a significant event because to Arabs, it essentially meant, again, from the Arab perspective, much of the Arab perspective was, well, your own commission gives a White Paper and then your government just ignores it because it gets pressure from Zionists. Okay? And they actually called it the Black Paper. Not in a racial meaning, but instead of white paper, a black paper, meaning it was bad for them, right? So, following the letter of Weizmann, a lot of these problems continued. So, what happened in the 1930s? So this might be a good place to talk about this. Leading up to, so again, make world connections. So I'll kind of finish up with this video. Make world connections. What starts in the early 1930s, right? The Great Depression. And it kind of throws everybody's off their attention on more important things, right? You probably relate to that right now. So as the effects of the Great Depression become more real in Britain, and you have another large-scale immigration happening, pretty much the Arab discontent grows more and more throughout the 1930s. And I'll pick up with that in the next video.